In the heart of Ndumiri, a bustling African city where wealth and power ruled, lived a young woman named Adanne. She was the daughter of Chief Okorie, one of the wealthiest merchants in the city. Adanne was breathtakingly beautiful, with skin as smooth as freshly pounded yam, and eyes as sharp as a leopard's. But her beauty was matched only by her arrogance. She walked the streets as if she owned the earth beneath her feet. Her clothes, imported from distant lands, shimmered under the golden sun. She spoke only to those who deemed worthy, which meant very few people ever heard her voice outside her family and elite friends. Her workers and maids, however, knew a different Adanne, one whose words were sharper than a hunter's spear, and whose temper was as unpredictable as a storm. She mistreated them terribly, making them redo chores over and over for the slightest mistake, refusing to pay their wages on time, and sometimes punishing them by denying them food. One of her maids, Nkem, was a quiet girl with a strong spirit. Unlike the others who feared Adanne, Nkem only pitied her. The river that does not respect the land will one day overflow and drown the village, she muttered under her breath every time Adanne humiliated her. One evening, after a lavish party at her father's mansion, Adanne stood by the grand balcony overlooking the city. The air was thick with the aroma of roasted meat and the distant sound of talking drums. She smiled smugly. She had the finest home, the most expensive clothes, and the attention of every wealthy man in the city. What more could she possibly need? But just as she turned to leave, an old woman appeared at the entrance of the balcony. Her back was bent with age, and her wrapper was dusty from the city streets. She held out her trembling hands. "Please, my daughter, a little food. I have not eaten in days," the woman begged. Adanne wrinkled her nose in disgust. "Do I look like your servant? If you want food, go and work for it like the rest of us," she spat, turning her back on the woman. The old woman sighed. "A river that refuses to share its water will one day dry up." Adanne scoffed and waved her off. "Enough with your riddles, old one. Be gone." But as the woman left, a chilling wind blew across the balcony, causing the lamps to flicker. The city's familiar warmth seemed to vanish for a brief moment. Adanne shook off the strange feeling, laughing at the woman's foolishness. Little did she know, the old woman's words were not just a proverb, they were a warning. The morning after the grand feast, Adanne woke to the sound of her maids bustling around her chambers. The golden sunlight filtered through the silk curtains, casting soft patterns on the marble floor. She stretched lazily and rang the small bell beside her bed. Within seconds, Nkem appeared, head bowed, hands clasped. "Prepare my bath," Adanne commanded, her voice sharp, "and make sure my breakfast is ready by the time I'm done." Nkem nodded and hurried away, but not before noticing something strange. A single black feather lay on Adanne's pillow, an unusual sight for someone who slept in the finest silk sheets, untouched by dirt or birds. The feather went unnoticed by Adanne, who bathed in fragrant oils and dressed in a new imported gown. As she made her way to the dining hall, she found her father, Chief Okorie, already seated. "Adanne, my daughter," he said, his deep voice laced with pride. "We have visitors today, wealthy traders from across the river. I expect you to be at your best behavior." Adanne smirked. "I am always at my best, Papa." But as she sat down, the servants brought in the morning meal, steaming yam porridge with smoked fish, fresh palm wine, and ripe plantains. Just as Adanne lifted her spoon, a strong gust of wind blew through the open windows, extinguishing the oil lamps and sending a chill through the room. The servants gasped. Even Chief Okorie furrowed his brows. "Strange weather," he muttered. Adanne rolled her eyes. "It's just the wind, father, let's eat." But as she lifted the spoon to her lips, she froze. There, in the middle of her food, lay another black feather. This time, it was long and thick, its edges shimmering as though dipped in ink. She pushed her plate away in disgust. "What is the meaning of this? Who dares to ruin my meal?" The servants trembled, swearing they had no idea where the feather came from. But Nkem, standing by the doorway, exchanged a knowing glance with the oldest cook in the kitchen, a woman who had lived long enough to recognize an omen when she saw one. Adanne dismissed the incident and left for the city's central market, where traders from all over came to sell their goods. She loved walking through the stalls, not to buy, but to be admired. People always whispered about her beauty and wealth, and she drank in their envy like honey. But today, the admiration was different. She could feel eyes following her, but when she turned, she saw only shadowed alleyways and empty spaces where no one stood. The laughter of the traders sounded distant, as though coming from another world. A chill ran down her spine. Then from the corner of her eye, she saw a familiar figure, a bent old woman with dusty wrappers, watching her from a fruit stall. Adanne's breath caught. It was the same woman she had insulted the night before. But how had she gotten here so quickly? And why was she smiling? The old woman lifted a single bony finger and pointed at Adanne. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Adanne took a step back, her heart pounding. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. Adanne's heart pounded in her chest as she locked eyes with the old woman. The wrinkled figure stood motionless by the fruit stall, her bony finger still pointing. The air around her seemed to shimmer, as though the heat of the market was bending reality itself. Adanne blinked, and just like that, the old woman was gone. She spun around, scanning the market. People moved about their business, as if nothing had happened. Had she imagined it? "Are you all right, my lady?" came a hesitant voice beside her. Adanne turned sharply to see Nkem, who had followed her as usual to carry her purchases. The young maid's face was lined with concern. "Did you see that woman just now?" Adanne asked, her voice unusually uncertain. Nkem shook her head. "Which woman?" Adanne scowled. "Never mind." She tossed a few gold cowries at a nearby trader and purchased an ornate beaded necklace, eager to distract herself. Yet, the feeling of unseen eyes remained. That night, back at the mansion, Adanne sat before her grand vanity mirror, brushing her long hair. The golden glow of the oil lamps cast warm shadows across the room, but despite their brightness, she felt cold. A gust of wind blew through the chamber. The curtains billowed. The lamps flickered. Then, whispering, faint, almost imperceptible, the kind of murmur one might hear in the dead of night when spirits roam freely. Adanne froze, her brush mid-stroke. The whispers grew louder. She turned sharply towards the window. It was shut. Her pulse quickened. The whispers were not coming from outside. They were coming from her mirror. Slowly, hesitantly, she looked at her reflection. At first, everything appeared normal. Her smooth, flawless skin, her high cheekbones, the deep brown of her eyes. But then, her reflection smiled. Adanne hadn't smiled. Her stomach twisted with dread. The reflection's lips moved, whispering words she could not understand. Dark ancient words. And then, a single black feather floated down from nowhere, landing softly on the vanity table. Adanne let out a strangled scream and stumbled backward. The door burst open and Nkem rushed in, lantern in hand. "My lady, what is it?" Adanne pointed at the mirror, but when she looked back, the reflection was normal. The whispers were gone. The feather had vanished. I need to sleep, she muttered, clutching her silk robe tightly. Leave me, Nkem. Nkem hesitated, her eyes filled with worry, but she bowed and stepped back. As you wish, my lady. As she left, she cast a final glance at the mirror, and for the briefest moment, she thought she saw something move within the glass. Something that was not Adanne. Adanne barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the weight of unseen eyes watching her. The whispers from the mirror echoed in her mind, though she could not understand the words. By dawn, dark circles rimmed her once flawless face, but even exhaustion could not dull her arrogance. She would not let fear control her. Draped in an expensive coral-adorned wrapper, she descended the grand staircase into the dining hall, where Chief Okorie and his guests were already feasting. The scent of roasted goat meat and spicy jollof rice filled the air. You look unwell, my daughter, her father observed between bites. Adanne forced a smile. I am fine, Papa, just tired. But as she reached for a cup of palm wine, her hand trembled. Then it happened. The cup slipped from her fingers. As it hit the floor, the hall fell into silence. The fine clay shattered, spilling deep red liquid across the marble. Too red, too much like blood. A collective gasp swept through the room. Chiebere, a bad omen, whispered one of the guests. A cold shiver crawled up Adanne's spine. She quickly regained herself, laughing dismissively. It's just wine, she snapped. Are we children to be frightened by mere superstition? But her father's face was grim. He exchanged looks with his advisors, all of whom seemed unsettled. One of the older guests, a chief from a neighboring city, cleared his throat. Sometimes, the spirit world speaks in signs, he said carefully. It would be wise to pay attention. Adanne rolled her eyes and stormed out. That afternoon, determined to prove to herself that nothing was wrong, she visited her favorite tailor in the heart of the city. She ordered an extravagant new gown, made from the finest imported silk, adorned with golden embroidery. Make it the best dress in all of Ndumiri, she boasted. I want all eyes on me at next week's royal banquet. The tailor nodded eagerly. It shall be done, my lady. As Adanne turned to leave, she caught sight of something through the shop's open window. Across the busy street, standing perfectly still, was the old woman. Adanne's heart slammed against her ribs. The woman was watching her again, her eyes filled with something unreadable. Pity, amusement. Then she lifted her frail hand and traced a slow, deliberate circle in the air. A single black feather drifted down from nowhere, landing at Adanne's feet. A gust of wind howled through the city. Adanne stumbled back, her breath hitching, and for the first time in her life, true fear gripped her heart. Adanne fled from the tailor's shop, her heart pounding. The image of the black feather at her feet burned in her mind. As she hurried back to the mansion, the bustling city seemed different, darker. The once lively market felt suffocating, the chatters of traders distant and hollow. Even the sun, which usually bathed the streets in golden light, seemed dimmer, hidden behind heavy clouds. Something was terribly wrong. By the time she reached home, she was breathless. She burst into her chambers and bolted the door behind her. For the first time in her life, she was afraid. She sat before her vanity, trying to calm herself, but as she reached for her comb, she saw it. A black feather lying neatly on the vanity table. Her breath hitched. She hadn't brought it in. She hadn't touched it. She stood abruptly, knocking over a bottle of scented oil. The liquid spilled across the table, distorting her reflection in the mirror. Then the whispering started again. This time, she understood the words. The river that hoards its water will dry to dust. Adanne gasped. The voice was inside her head, yet it surrounded her, filling every corner of the room. The mirror flickered, and suddenly, her reflection was no longer her own. The twisted, shadowy version of herself stared back, its lips curled into a cruel smile, its eyes hollow and black. Adanne let out a scream. The door burst open, and Nkem rushed in alarmed. "My lady, what is wrong?" Adanne spun to face her. "Do you not see it?" she shrieked, pointing at the mirror. Nkem hesitated, stepping forward cautiously. She looked into the glass, then back at Adanne. "See what, my lady?" Adanne's blood ran cold. The reflection had returned to normal. Nkem's gaze lingered on her mistress with something almost like pity. "Should I call for a healer?" Adanne clenched her fist. "Get out!" Nkem hesitated but obeyed. As soon as the door closed, Adanne collapsed onto her bed, her breath ragged. She needed to rid herself of the curse, but there was only one person she could think of, the same person she had mocked, humiliated, and turned away, the old woman. For the first time in her life, Adanne swallowed her pride. She had to find the old woman, draped in a dark cloak to avoid being recognized. She left the mansion alone, ignoring the worried glances from the servants. The city streets, once a place of admiration and envy for her, now felt sinister. Shadows stretched too long. The wind carried whispers that no one else seemed to hear. She found her way to the outskirts of the city, where the market stalls ended, replaced by twisted trees and narrow dirt paths. The air smelled of damp earth and distant rain. The old woman was waiting for her. She sat on a low wooden stool outside a small mud hut, peeling a mango with a knife that looked far too sharp for the task. Her wrinkled face betrayed no surprise at Adanne's presence. "So, the river that never bends has come to seek a path," the woman said without looking up. Adanne stiffened. You have done something to me," she accused, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound strong. The old woman chuckled, the sound dry like rustling leaves. "I? No, child, you have done this to yourself." Adanne clenched her fist. "Enough riddles. Tell me what is happening to me." The woman finally met her gaze. Her eyes were deep, ancient, holding wisdom older than the city itself. "The spirits have spoken, child. You walk with wealth, but leave misery in your footsteps. You speak with honeyed lips, but spit poison on those below you. You have taken much and given nothing. The river that holds its water will dry to dust." Adanne's breath hitched. Those were the same words she had heard in the whispers. "I don't believe in superstitions," she snapped. The old woman smiled, showing teeth too sharp for her age. "Then why are you here?" Adanne had no answer. The old woman leaned closer. "You are marked, child. The spirits do not take lightly to those who trample upon others without care. The black feathers are warnings. If you do not change, the final feather will fall, and then it will be too late." A chill ran down Adanne's spine. "How do I stop it?" The woman studied her for a long moment, then reached into the folds of her wrapper, pulling out a small, rough-looking calabash. She handed it to Adanne. "Drink this before the next moon rises. It will cleanse you, but cleansing is not enough. You must change your ways, or the spirits will take what they are owed." Adanne hesitated, staring at the dark liquid inside the calabash. The old woman's eyes gleamed. "You are at a crossroad, child. Choose wisely." Adanne clutched the calabash and fled back into the city, her heart pounding. She had the cure, but could she truly change? Adanne locked herself in her chambers, staring at the calabash on her table. The thick dark liquid inside swelled ominously under the dim light of her oil lamp. "Drink before the next moon rises." The old woman's words echoed in her mind. But doubt clawed at her. Could a simple drink really break whatever curse had befallen her? A knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. "My lady," it was Nkem. Adanne hesitated, then forced her voice to remain steady. "What do you want?" "A message arrived for you from the palace. The king's son has invited you to a royal banquet tomorrow night." Adanne's lips curled into a smirk. The prince had been courting her for months, enchanted by her beauty and wealth. What cause? Nonsense. She would go to the banquet, dazzle everyone, and put this madness behind her. She pushed the calabash aside. "Prepare my finest gown," she ordered. The night of the banquet arrived. Adanne wore an exquisite gown of deep red silk, embroidered with gold, designed to make her the center of attention. As she entered the palace hall, all eyes turned to her, just as they always did. The music, the laughter, the scent of roasted meats and sweet palm wine filled the grand room. She basked in it all, reveling in her own importance. But then, a shadow flickered at the edge of her vision. She turned sharply. The old woman was there, standing by the banquet entrance, watching her. But no one else seemed to notice her presence. Adanne's breath hitched. The woman raised her hand and let a single black feather fall. As soon as it touched the floor, a violent gust of wind swept through the hall. The lamps flickered wildly. Plates clattered. The music faltered. Adanne gasped as a sharp pain shot through her chest. Her vision blurred, her breath shallow. Something was happening to her. She stumbled forward, reaching for the prince, only to see his horrified expression. "My lady, your face!" someone cried. Confused, she turned to the nearest polished surface, a golden serving tray, and what she saw made her scream. Her beauty was fading. Her once flawless skin had begun to crack like dry earth. Her eyes, once bright, were sinking into darkness. Her lips twisted, losing their rich color. She was withering before their eyes. The hall erupted into chaos. Servants rushed away. The prince recoiled. Guests whispered in terror. "She is cursed," someone yelled. Adanne turned wildly, searching for the old woman. But she was gone. Her hands trembled. She had ignored the warnings, and now the final feather had fallen. Adanne fled from the banquet hall, her once grand presence reduced to a stumbling, panicked mess. Gasps and murmurs followed her as she shoved past the guests, her trembling hands trying to shield her disfiguring face. The prince did not stop her. Her father, Chief Okorie, did not rush to her aid. No one did. By the time she reached the mansion, her body felt weaker, as if something vital was being drained from her. She collapsed onto the marble floor of the foyer, her ragged breathing echoing through the empty hall. "My lady," Nkem rushed to her side, eyes wide with horror. "What happened to you?" Adanne gritted her teeth, her voice barely above a whisper. "Bring me the calabash." Nkem hesitated but obeyed. Adanne grabbed the wooden vessel with trembling fingers. She had been a fool to ignore the old woman's warning. She had thought herself untouchable. Without another thought, she tipped the calabash to her lips and drank deeply. The liquid was bitter, thick like palm oil, with a taste of burnt earth and old magic. As soon as it touched her throat, a searing pain shot through her body. She screamed, convulsing, as the room spun around her. Shadows stretched across the walls, twisting into monstrous shapes. The whispers returned, louder, crueler, surrounding her like a storm. The river that holds its water will dry to dust. Her skin burned, her vision darkened, and then silence. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on the cold floor. Nkem, shaking her frantically. My lady! My lady!" Adanne groaned, Her entire body sore. She touched her face, expecting the cracked, withering skin, but it was smooth again. She let out a shaky breath of relief. It had worked. She was saved. A wicked smile curled on her lips. The spirits had tried to take her, but she had outwitted them. She was still the great Adanne, untouchable and powerful. She stood, regaining her composure. "Prepare my bath and bring me fresh clothes," she ordered coldly. Nkem hesitated, then bowed. "Yes, my lady." Adanne strode towards her chambers with renewed confidence. She had won, or so she thought. Adanne sat before her vanity, gazing at her restored beauty. Her skin was flawless once more, her eyes bright, her lips full. The shadows that had plagued her were gone. She had beaten the curse, or so she believed. She resumed her old ways almost immediately. When Nkem brought her evening meal, she criticized the presentation. "Are you blind? This is not how a noble woman's meal should be served." The girl bowed quickly. "I'm sorry, my lady. Get out of my sight." Nkem scurried away. Adanne smirked, relishing her power. The old woman had tried to break her, but Adanne was stronger. Days passed, then a week. Everything seemed back to normal, until one evening, as she prepared for another grand event, she noticed something strange. Her gold jewelry felt heavy on her skin, as if it were pressing deep into her flesh. She rubbed her wrist, frowning. Then she saw it, a single black feather, lying on her bed. Her heart pounded. She had drunk the potion. The curse was supposed to be gone. A gust of wind blew through the room, though the windows were closed. The lamps flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Then her mirror rippled like water. Adanne stepped back, her breath shallow, her reflection twisted. At first it was her. Then, slowly, the face in the glass became something else, something hollow, monstrous, a version of herself with sunken eyes, stretched lips, and skin that cracked like dry earth. A shriek escaped her lips. She stumbled backwards as the whispers returned, no longer distant, but clear and deafening. The river that holds its water will dry to dust. "No!" Adanne screamed. "I drank the potion. I did what you wanted." A laughter echoed around her, low and mocking. Then, from the darkness of the mirror, the old woman stepped forward. "You still do not understand," the crone murmured, her eyes gleaming. "A potion does not cleanse a wicked heart." Adanne shook her head wildly. "You tricked me." The old woman only smiled. "The spirits gave you a chance. You wasted it, and now it is time to collect what is owed." A gust of wind howled through the chamber. The black feather on the bed lifted into the air, then multiplied. Feathers rained down around her, covering the floor, the vanity, her bed. Adanne gasped as her fingers tingled, then stiffened. Her body was changing. Her golden skin darkened, hardening like cracked wood. Her limbs grew rigid, her breath shallow. Her screams turned to silence as her body became still, lifeless. When the wind settled, Adanne was gone. In her place stood a tall black statue. Her face, once beautiful and full of arrogance, was frozen in an expression of terror. The mansion doors blew open, and the wind carried her final whisper into the night. She had become nothing more than a cautionary tale, a warning for those who mistreated others. The river that hoarded its water had finally dried to dust. Morning arrived, but the grand mansion was silent. No servants bustled about, no orders were barked, no laughter or music filled the halls. Only the cold, eerie presence of the black statue that now stood in Adanne's chamber. Word spread quickly. By midday, the city was abuzz with whispers. "Have you heard? Adanne is gone." Gone? No, she has been turned to stone. The spirits have punished her. Some rejoiced, others shuddered, but no one dared to step foot inside her mansion, except for one. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Nkem, the faithful maid, returned to the room where her mistress had fallen. Her heart pounded as she stepped closer to the statue. Adanne's frozen face was still twisted in terror, her once smooth skin now rough stone. Her luxurious gown had hardened into an unyielding shell, her golden jewelry dull and lifeless. Nkem swallowed hard. Despite everything, a part of her pitied the woman. She reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing the stone's hand. It was ice cold, but then a sharp crack echoed through the chamber. Nkem gasped and stumbled back. The statue trembled. Tiny fractures snaked across its surface like creeping vines. Then, Adanne's lips moved. A low, raspy whisper escaped. "Help me!" Nkem screamed and fled the room, nearly tumbling down the grand staircase in her haste. She did not stop running until she was far from the mansion, panting, trembling. The whispers returned that night, but this time, they did not belong to the spirit. They belonged to Adanne. And though no one dared to enter the house again, some swore that if you stood outside its iron gates at midnight, you could hear his soft, desperate voice drifting from the highest window. "Help me, please, I'm still here." But no help would ever come. Adanne had not simply been punished, she had been trapped forever. The moral lesson of the story is: 1. Pride and cruelty lead to destruction. Adanne's arrogance and mistreatment of others ultimately led to her downfall. No amount of wealth or beauty can protect a person from the consequences of their action. True change comes from the heart. A person cannot escape punishment simply by seeking a quick fix. Adanne drank the potion, but because she did not change her ways, the curse remained. True redemption requires humility and a sincere change of character. Power and wealth are temporary. Adanne believed her riches made her untouchable, but in the end, all her wealth could not save her. Material possessions are fleeting, but kindness and respect for others leave a lasting legacy. The way you treat others will determine your fate. Those who mistreat others will one day face justice, whether from people, nature, or supernatural. The spirits in the story ensure that Adanne paid for her cruelty, just as life often ensures that arrogance and wickedness do not go unpunished. Beware of ignoring warnings. Adanne was given multiple warnings about her fate, yet she ignored them, believing she was above consequences. Wisdom comes from listening and learning before it is too late. Thank you for watching. Till next time.